Hey everyone, thanks for coming to the Right-Click Tools 4.2 release webinar. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. We're just going to give people a few extra minutes to join the webinar. So bear with us and we'll probably get started around 9:02 Central Time. Hi everyone, welcome to the Right-Click Tools 4.2 release webinar. My name is Chris Muster. I'm the CTO here at Recast Software. And today I'm joined by Mark Godfrey and Brian Dam, two of the engineers who work on the product every day and who are responsible for a number of the features that we're going to present today. Brian's going to be keeping an eye on any questions that come up. So if you do have a question while we're going through things throughout the webinar or about the Right-Click Tools in general, you can use the Q&A button inside the Zoom application, and we'll try to get those answered in real time. If you're watching this on the YouTube live stream, we're also keeping an eye on the YouTube chat. So feel free to ask questions there, and we'll try to get those answered there as well. We'll have an extended Q&A session at the end too. So if there are questions that maybe warrant a little more explanation, we'll be able to answer those at the end verbally and kind of go into more depth with that. The agenda for today looks pretty similar to last release webinars. We're going to start off talking about how we release right-click tools and some of the differences between the different types of releases and what you can expect from those releases. Then we'll jump into a demo of some of the more impactful features in 4.2. This will not be an exhaustive list of all of the features inside the right-click tools. If you want more information about some of the things we don't cover here, you can schedule a demo on our website, and we're more than happy to jump into those on a one-on-one basis. But today we're going to be more focused on what's changed since 4.1, and we're again focusing on the things that we find the most valuable in the 4.2 tool set. Then Chelsea will dig into the upgrade process a little bit for 4.2. She'll show you how to get the tools on the website, as well as different parts of the website that can help guide you along the process of using 4.2. Then we'll leave some time at the end for that extended Q&A session that we talked about before. As far as the release cycle goes, not much has changed since the 4.0 release. We had kind of a longer 4.0 development cycle. Since then, we've been releasing new versions every month. These monthly releases can include bug fixes, they can include new features, but we might do a monthly release where that's only bug fixes or that's only new features. They're kind of a way to get you on the latest and greatest code that we're releasing. But we don't expect everyone to go and stay on the monthly releases. We know that can be kind of a time-consuming process to get everyone's right-click tools updated. If you do want to stay on the latest and greatest, though, you can enable the bug fix update notifications inside of Configure Recast RCT. If you're using Recast Management Server, that setting lives inside of the Recast Management Server web UI. But yeah, as I said, we don't expect everyone to stay on those releases. We might recommend that you go to a release if you submit a bug to us and we fix it in a monthly release. We will notify you and say, hey, why don't you go try this release? We think we fixed your bug. Those releases are then rolled up into quarterly releases. The last quarterly release was the 4.1 release back in December. This webinar is for the 4.2 release that we wrapped up the code for in March. And there's typically a slightly longer delay between when we wrap up the code for the quarterly release and when we actually release it, because we have to get some of the documentation and some of the videos and blogs out before we actually do the release, so that when you download it, everything's ready to go. But you can enable update notifications inside of Configure Recast RCT or inside the Recast Management Server settings UI if you want to get notified on the dot releases. By default, we do enable those. So go there to double check that it's still enabled if you want to see those notifications. As far as what's new in 4.2, we've focused a lot on existing tools in 4.2 and trying to make those better. The client information and system information tools have been inside of the right-click tools for a very long time. And with this release, our main focus was on UI standardization, as well as getting those tools to scale to multiple devices or be able to run on multiple devices simultaneously in a consistent fashion. With the Remote Software Center, we received a lot of feedback after the 4.1 release, and we were able to implement some of the top requested features for Remote Software Center. So we're excited to dive into that. The hardware and Firmware audit dashboard was also, I believe, released in 4.1, and we've added a bunch of functionality to that. Mark's going to go over that a little bit later. And similarly with the BitLocker dashboard, we've been getting a lot of feedback on the BitLocker dashboard, and we've got some good stuff to show there. So we're going to cover all 5 of those features today. Some of the stuff we're not going to cover are the new installer. Brian's done a ton of work on our Recast Management Server installer so that we no longer have to prompt for .NET Core upgrades. Microsoft has said they're on approximately a yearly cadence for .NET Core updates, so we'll really get to test this out come the November, December release, and when that happens, it should just install automatically without prompting you to add any additional prereqs. So that's great. And then streaming support and Recast Management Server. We're not going to demo that today, but this is really all about large collection support. So we had a couple of customers come to us and say, hey, when I run the right-click tools on a large collection of like 20,000 devices, I get this nebulous error message where after digging into it, it had to do with how large of a payload we were delivering to the Recast Management Server. In .NET Core 3.1, Microsoft introduced what was called streaming support in the communication layer that we use. So it allowed us to break that initial large payload up into smaller chunks and just kind of stream them up to the server. So we can most likely support arbitrarily large collection sizes now, which is great. But again, we're not going to demo that. It's really just running the same right-click tools on a bigger collection. One thing we are going to demo, but is not in the 4.2 release, is we have a bonus kind of sneak peek feature of Config Manager fast channel support. And what this is running the right-click tools over the config-man fast channel that was introduced in 2012 SP1 or so, and in particular over the run scripts feature that was introduced in like 17 current branch 1710. So we are going to demo that. It's not in the 4.2 release, but it will be coming in our April monthly update. So keep an eye out for that. When we launch it, we'll have blogs and such on how to use that feature, how to enable it. All right, so now we're going to jump into the feature demo. And the first feature we're going to demo today is that client information tool. In 4.1, this tool was a single device tool, right? So it's under client tools, client information. In the 4.1 release, it was only meant to be run on a single device. If I tried to multi-select like I've done right here, it would actually pop multiple windows with a bunch of different tabs out on the top here. The tabs in this release are exactly the same, with some minor differences. So the general components, cache details, those are all very similar to what you've seen in the 4.1 release. The difference being that now when you click on these, one, they load dynamically as I click on them, but two, the data itself is actually grouped by what we find to be relevant categories, right? So here we're grouping by client version and site code, and if I drill in, I can see all of the devices that are of that client version and part of the RCT site. And also get more details on those devices, right? I can see the HTTP port, HTTPS port, which management point it's connected to, some other information that's not configured in our demo environment, as well as the client GUID. So it's a good way to kind of compare and contrast some of the different versions of config-man in your environment. Similarly with the components tab, we've kind of grouped all of the config-man client components by version, right? So if I go in, I can dig in and see, well, is this component enabled on these devices, what version it's on, and how many devices have that particular version of that component. A lot of the information in the client info tool is similar to the data that you would get if you ran the config manager client control panel applet, right? So there is actually a components tab inside that config manager control panel applet that shows very similar data. The cache tab is where I think this starts to get a little bit interesting, right? So here we can see all of the cache locations across our environment, as well as what size they've been configured for. So if say I need to, if I see a remediation or a configuration drift in my environment, I can quickly remediate that cache size and change it back to what I want. Or say, I really want to deploy some large application to this device. I can quickly change its cache size. And then when I refresh the results after this runs, it'll show up in a different state in this list, right? So I can kind of see the grouping live as these devices report back. Additionally, we can see how much space is available, how much cache space has been used, and get that in percentage form. If I see something that's has most of its cache used, I can go ahead and select it and clear the cache to delete all of those entries. The cache details tab kind of takes that cache tab and goes a little bit further, right? So whereas this provided kind of high level information, cache details lets us see what content is on each of those devices, right? So I can see the content name, the version, and the size. And this is an area where we've made an impactful change for both community and enterprise users, right? In 4.1, we only showed this content GUID here, which is great because GUIDs are insanely useful for certain things, but providing detailed information about what cache content is on the device is probably not one of them. So what we've added in 4.2 is the ability to query your config manager SMS provider for all of these content GUIDs. We're basically looking at the DP area and saying, hey, for this content GUID, what is actually out on the DPs? And if we can find that content name, we'll return it here. So you can see that we have a bunch of updates here. definition updates, but we also have like applications and packages down here as well. So we're querying all sorts of data from your config.man site to figure out what these GUIDs mean. If we can't find a particular piece of content, we just label it as orphaned. So we don't know what this content actually is. If I want to get more information about what that particular content is, I can go ahead and select it and hit browse. And it'll pop up the C dollar share on that device, and I can see, well, based on the name of the content and the size, this is probably like a Windows 10 cumulative update or something like that. And because it's orphaned, it might be safe to just go ahead and delete that content on those devices. Moving on to the Applications tab. The Applications tab is kind of interesting in the Client Info tool. It was really an area where we had duplicate functionality between this and the Remote Software Center. And because of that, we didn't want to regress any functionality for community users. So we went ahead and kept the Applications tab inside of Client Information. But we are limiting it to only a single device if you're on the community tools, so it behaves similarly to the way it did in 4.1. But we did add a couple of nice things here, right? So number one, you can kind of get the icon on any applications that have it. And two, we actually started showing packages in this list as well, so you can see which packages are deployed to a device. You are going to get a more rich experience inside of the Remote Software Center Applications tab, so I'd recommend using that over this. And we'll get to more details about some of the differences there in a little bit. But some of the nice things about this is you can come in and kick off an uninstall or an install on these devices, or multiple if you want. So it's kind of cool. And it's just a way to get a remote view into that Software Center area for device-based deployments. The Execution History tab shows you all of the packages and programs that have been executed by a config.man client. And if you drill in, you can see, which user it ran as, what the state is, when it last ran, and the error reason. Why did this thing actually fail? So that can be useful for diagnosing package program deployments in your environment. And lastly, boundaries. This was an area that we did make some maybe bigger changes to the way the UI was structured. In 4.1, these were kind of, you had boundaries up at the top, you had boundary groups at the bottom. In 4.2, we decided to try to roll those up into a similar type of view where we first roll up by boundary groups, and then if you dig into that boundary group, you can see which boundaries are associated with it. And as you go further down, you can see which devices are in that boundary. You can also look at a special group that we've created called unassigned boundaries. And this is where all the boundaries that aren't a part of any particular boundary group are going to end up. So you can see we have one boundary that is not part of any group that we've added here too. So that's the Client Information tool in 4.2. Again, a lot of the functionality is really about taking the 4.1 features and making them scale to run on multiple devices simultaneously. Next, we'll move on to the System Info tool. And while the Client Info tool was all about the Config Manager client, the System Info tool is all about the Windows operating system on the device. So the Client Info tool is pulling data about the config.man client. It's pulling data from the config.man client API. The System Info tool is pulling data from the operating system. Right? It's not aware of any config.man client components. Right? So you might see some duplicate information between like the Client Info tool, the System Info tool, and the Remote Software Center, but it's all context specific. So if we talk about like applications in the Client Info tool, that's really applications deployed to the config.man client. But as we talk about applications here in System Info, we're really talking about applications, with regard to the Windows OS. So it's basically like add remove programs data. So you might see some overloaded terminology in some of these applications, and that's kind of the reason why. But System Info was kind of different than the Client Info tool as far as what functionality it supported in 4.1. Right? In 4.1, if you ran the System Info tool on multiple devices, you would get a completely different UI than when you ran it on a single device. right? The single device had this tabbed results view that had a lot of these same tabs that you saw, or that you see on the left here. But when you ran it on multiple devices, you got a large data grid view, and a list of devices and some properties about those devices along the data grid columns. And it didn't really lend itself to showing data that had multiple items in it. So we wanted to rewrite that one to use this kind of grouping style UI. And on this operating systems tab, we can see the first part of that, where we're grouping all of the devices by both the OS caption, the OS version, and the OS build number. And if I drill in, I can see some of the device-specific information about those, right? The IP address, the domain, console user, if this device is pending restart, as well as the last boot time. And it's pretty useful because a lot of the same information that you got in both the multi-device and single device tools are available, right? And you can do a lot of the same functionality there, where if I see a device hasn't rebooted for a while, well, maybe I just want to kick off a reboot of that device. The hardware tab, similar to the operating systems tab, but it's all about the hardware that's the hardware that's in your environment, right? So we group it by manufacturer and model. As you drill in, you can see serial number, MAC addresses, BIOS version, and BIOS release dates. Maybe if these BIOS versions don't match up, you could kick off the Remote Software Center tool, or to run a BIOS update or something like that. The applications tab is where I think this new UI gets really interesting. This is kind of enabling functionality that didn't really exist before, right? The OS and hardware data was kind of in that multi-device system info tool, but the applications were not. So now we can get a count of all of the devices, or of all of the software and add remove programs across my devices, and see how many devices have it. And at a glance here, I can already see that I already have a configuration issue in my environment, right? I have 2 versions of MBAM in the environment. 3 devices are on an older version and 1 device is on a newer version. So I might want to kick off Remote Software Center on those to get those upgraded to the new version. If I see an application that shouldn't be in my environment, I can select it and hit the uninstall button to kick off the uninstall command for that particular app. So a really useful tool for getting information at a glance about what's installed in your environment in real time. This is all live data. The Windows Updates tab shows me updates that have been installed on this device. And we can see here the KB article, a brief description of the update, and really the description just turns into what classification it is, as well as the number of devices that have an update. If I drill in, I can see when it was installed and who it was installed by. And if I click the link here, it'll actually take me to the knowledge base article for that particular update, so I can get more information about why I might need to install this update. The services tab is another really useful area. It lets me see all of the services that are installed on all of my devices, and take action on those, right? So if I'm having, I get a bunch of users call in and say, hey, I'm having issues with some application, or having some connectivity issues somewhere, I can come in, if it's a service issue, I can come in and quickly change the start mode of that service by selecting the item from the list and clicking the button. I can start, stop, and restart the service by, again, selecting the option and hitting restart. So it can be really useful for helping to troubleshoot various issues at scale, or service-related issues at scale. The drivers tab will show me a list of all of the drivers that are installed on my devices. And this can be useful for those of you who are operating system deployment administrators, right? If you're responsible for the task sequences in your environment, this can be useful to run this tool on a collection of all the same model, and just get an idea of how many different types of drivers that are out there, right? Oftentimes it's useful to sort by this devices column and say that, well, only 2 of the devices have this version of the audio endpoint driver. Maybe there's something that needs to be fixed either in my task sequence processes, or maybe I need to deploy an update to these drivers via applications or third-party updates or something like that. So this can be particularly useful for those scenarios. There are a lot of like single device, drivers out there. Typically, you just want to ignore those and focus on like the Intel drivers or the NVIDIA drivers, that type of thing. User profiles is another area that I think this new version of the tool adds a lot of value. So at a glance, I can see all of the user profiles across all these different devices. And if I drill in, I can see things like, well, when was the last time they logged into this profile? Is the profile currently loaded, like right now? Is it, we check a couple of different areas, right? We check WMI, the registry, and the users folder on the remote device to see, is this profile actually present on this device? If someone leaves the company or something like that, I can just select the profile and hit delete to make sure any cache credentials aren't still out there. They'll be forced to check in with my domain controller if I delete the profile, and we can guarantee that some laptop isn't out there that has those credentials cached, which is nice. The local group members tab will show all of the local groups on those devices. This one to me is really most interesting with this administrator's account. I can at a glance see which devices have various members in the local admins group. And if there's a user that maybe I don't expect, I can select it and hit remove. I can also drill down further and see which devices have that particular group member. So really useful for quickly validating that my administrators group is populated with the correct users and nobody's somehow convinced our IT staff to add someone that's not supposed to be there. It can also be interesting for other troubleshooting, right? So, remote desktop users, I can see that we have a user, but only on one of the devices, right? Why does this device need Garrett's account to be added to the remote desktop users group, but no other device has membership in that group? So it might be worth digging into. Maybe there's a mismatch in group policies there. And finally, the batteries tab. Unfortunately, the batteries tab isn't particularly interesting in our demo environment because it's all virtual machines. But this would show all of the batteries on all of these systems grouped by the name of the battery as well as the type of the battery, like lithium ion, nickel, cadmium. And when you drill into those, you can see various health statistics about those batteries, right? You could see what percentage charge is remaining. You can also see things like the serial number. So if user calls in and says, "Hey, look, my battery is only lasting me 30 minutes at a time these days. Something needs to be done about that." I can run this tool, get an idea of what battery I need to order for a replacement part, and get that taken care of. So that's the system information tool. And again, it's about, the goal here was UI consistency across both single device and multi-device actions. The next tool I'm going to run is the Remote Software Center tool. And this one was shipped in 4.1, and we got a lot of really good feedback on it. It seemed like people were pretty excited about this feature, and we were really excited to ship it. But again, we had a lot of good feedback, and most of the feedback was related to this applications tab. So we had a lot of folks reach out to us and say, "Hey, you know what, this Remote Software Center is great, but my company uses user-based deployments almost exclusively. So I can't actually use this feature until you add user-based deployments to the application," which makes a lot of sense, right? I know Brian's former company was very similar, where they targeted user-based deployments everywhere. So with 4.2, we've added this drop-down up at the top that lets you choose various users to view the user-based deployments for that particular user account. And we populate this list in a couple of ways, right? So the second entry here is the user that's running the Remote Software Center, right? That's that's the view that I would get if I remoted into these devices and pulled up the remote software center uh, on those machines. So, as that loads, we can see that I actually have a slightly different view than the device-based view, right? The device view is the kind of the 4.1 view where it's showing all of the deployments targeting those devices. But you'll notice here that I don't have the config console deployed to the devices. So if I wanted to quickly install the config console, I could just run this, select my user account, select the application, and hit install, and that would kick off the config console install on those devices. So it can be useful for quickly getting some software out on the device if I'm maybe in a testing environment or something like that. But it can also be helpful if a user calls in and they need some help installing some software, right? So if Michael B calls in and says, "Hey, look, I know you sent me these instructions for installing this application, but I'm just not seeing it in the software center," I can actually click on his account and view what the configman site server thinks should be deployed on that device. Now, we are doing a direct call against the configman site server in this scenario, so it won't necessarily reflect what the user actually sees if if there's something wrong with the configman client on that device for whatever reason. So it's something to keep in mind. Also, because we're running this as a different user than Michael B, we can't actually install these for that user, right? The install and uninstall capability is limited to the user account that's running the tools, so I can't install things as other users here. So that's the user-based deployments feature. Again, one of the most highly requested features in 4.2, and we're super excited to be able to ship that. The other kind of feedback we got was that it's really hard to tell when things go wrong inside of this remote software center UI. So, in 4.1, computers that weren't on, computers that failed the WMI call for whatever reason, we wouldn't give any feedback. They just wouldn't show up in the list. With 4.2, we've added this errors section. So I can see, when a device is not on, I get a list of those devices here, and I can, at least be aware that that those devices are tried to run the action, but we failed for some reason. And the last thing we added was the ability to run right-click tools from within this. And this is the same across that system info and client info tools. We have right-click tools on all of the nested drill down features. So all of your favorite right-click tools will still work inside those nested data grids. So that concludes the Remote Software Center tool. Now Mark is going to take us through the hardware and firmware audit dashboard as well as the BitLocker dashboard.
Thank you, Chris. If you guys will give me one moment to share my screen here. All right. So this hardware and firmware audit dashboard actually started out as a hardware audit dashboard in 4.1. Our plan was always to add a little more to it later, and sure enough, we did. So in terms of practical use cases for this thing, the two I always gave for the hardware audit dashboard were, first off, hardware refresh time. I'm sure everyone has like a 3 to 5 year-ish life cycle on all their hardware, and when it's ready or comes time to have to purchase new ones, you need to know what you have. And this lets you kind of service that data. The other one is Windows 10 update time. So knowing what models you have in your environment is great for testing. You're going to have to know, or you have to test this on your varying hardware models, so you know which builds work on which areas you might have, and so on and so forth. Let me quick show you an overview of this before I go a little further. So you'll select a collection here to scan. I'm just going to go in all systems, and I'm going to hit scan. And by default, it shows these 3 pie charts, which were also shown for the hardware component of this. And you can click on one of these segments of the charts. Like Chris said, we only have virtual machines, unfortunately. Otherwise, chassis would show desktop, laptop, pizza box, all the different chassis types manufacturer would have. Like Dell, HP, Lenovo, so on and so forth. Anyway, so we get down in here and we've added a few new things for 4.2. One of them was a big user request. People wanted operating system and version, so we added that here on the right side. You'll see it. I think console user was also added. That was probably a Gary Block request. And then the other three are these big ones right here. UEFI status. Do you have UEFI enabled, or is it in legacy BIOS mode? Also, do you have secure boot enabled? And then what version your BIOS is running. These are also critically important for Windows 10 build update time. Most of you hopefully went to UEFI and secure boot when you migrated from Windows 7 to Windows 10. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people who did not get that done, and build update time is a perfect time to rectify that and get them switched over. The other thing is making sure your BIOS version is up to date to fully support all the new features in the Windows 10 build. So one of the cool things about Windows 10 is it has a lot of fancy security features. Most of them rely on something called virtualization-based security. Well, the thing about virtualization-based security features is they all have firmware components that they rely upon. One of those features, for instance, Credential Guard, they actually have been enhancing with subsequent builds, but they often will need an up-to-date BIOS to take advantage of the new enhancements. So knowing what version you're on helps you to plan for this. And say you go through this list and you see, oh, this one's on an old version. And you can kick off Remote Software Center, or add the device to a collection that's already got like a forced deployment and get that going for you. Some other cooler things with this is, in addition to these 3 pie charts, you can dynamically select which charts you want. So if you don't want these, or you want to add some other charts, you can add or remove between 1 and 6 pie charts. So let's go with, like, say, model, UEFI, secure boot. And you can also reorder these things however you want to. If I want to drag and drop, move them around. And then there's this nested filtering box. And what that'll do is, instead of just clicking on one, if you click on the pie chart on the far left one, it'll filter the pie chart to the right of it based on whatever you selected in the one to the left. And then once you finally click on the farthest right one, it'll give you that filtered down data. This kind of helps you process through if you're in an environment that has like obscene amounts of variation of models, so on and so forth. I guess it's not as critical for UEFI status because it's one of 2 options. But I know we have one customer who had, HP, Lenovo, Dell, Toshiba, Samsung, and they're like, oh, this is so much data once it comes to the models, and we only want to see the Dell models. So this kind of helped out with that. You can also, I believe there's a question about exporting data. While some of our other tools don't have that, all of our dashboards do have a little export to CSV button here, so you can always export that data. So then we're going to move over to the BitLocker compliance chart here. So this one right now you can select by an OU. If you don't select a specific OU, it's just going to scan the entire domain there. And it's got 3 different pie charts here. So the far left one is just talking about, is there a recovery key stored in X specified storage method for this specific device. And previously we supported Active Directory and MBAM. As of 4.2, and this is basically the biggest change for this dashboard, we're adding CM BitLocker management compliance. I'm sure many of you have heard, MBAM is going end of extended support in I think it's July 9th, 2024. And at that point, I would not recommend using it because they won't be patching it anymore. So their plan for an on-premise management solution, assuming you're not moving to Intune or Azure AD for your key storage, is rolling this functionality into Configuration Manager with this cool new BitLocker management function. If you're on 1910 or newer, you probably have this already. If you go in like your endpoint protection area, you'll see BitLocker management, and you can create a policy set to target at your machines. There's a little more to it than that to set it up. You first have to like enable the feature in your admin area. And then there's like a PowerShell script to add the self-service and help desk IIS sites. At any rate, so you see here, this will show basically where your keys are stored, whether it's in AD, MBAM, CM BitLocker management, or some combination of 2 or 3 of those. This is basically what we have in our environment. Most of it's in here. We have one device that has it in AD as well as that. This is a newer development environment I'm actually presenting from, so I actually don't never bothered setting up MBAM in this one yet. So you don't see unknown for the MBAM compliance pie chart here in the middle. Otherwise, that'll show you compliant, non-compliant, or unknown. And then the far right, this is a completely new pie chart for CM BitLocker management compliance. And again, it's pulling all this data from the CM database. And it's going to show you whether it's compliant, not compliant. Maybe it is encrypted, but it's not managed by this CM site. That's yeah. So this one doesn't have a policy targeted at it, or some unknown devices. All right. And just like those other ones, you can export to CSV. So what determines compliance is a big question people ask. So in MBAM, you set your group policies, right? You have these MDOP, MBAM templates, and you'll set, hey, I want these devices to be configured using this encryption algorithm. It has to be use space only, yada, yada, yada. So the compliance is based on the policies you configure. Likewise with CM BitLocker management, you go into that little area under endpoint protection, you configure your policies, and if that device is configured and compliant with the policies you set, that's what shows compliance in this area. So I'm going to transition you back over to Chris, and he should be able to go into, I believe, the configuration manager fast channel support now.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So we mentioned that this was a preview feature in that's coming in the April release. It's basically a way to run right-click tools over that fast channel, and our goal here was to give people extra options for running right-click tools when maybe users are remote or that kind of thing. So I've got here the system information tool, and I'm going to hit refresh. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to kick off a config manager script that we've imported into our site. We can see here the script name is recast fast channel. And if I show status on that script, we can see that as it starts pulling data back, the script will move to complete. So it's actually pulling data from that config man fast channel rather than doing the normal reach out to the device, right? So this opens up a couple of interesting possibilities, right? So one, if you have a CMG, this might allow your right-click tools to work over that CMG. And I say might because we don't actually have a CMG in our environment, so we haven't verified it. But since we're just using the native config man run scripts feature, this should allow you to run all of your right-click tools or most of your right-click tools over the CMG. The other interesting thing it allows is you no longer have to be an admin on this device to run right-click tools if you're using this config man fast channel. Since the client itself is running as a local system and you're running scripts against it, it should just work that way. And additionally, you don't need to open any ports, right? Because the client maintains its connection with the management point, and the data is sent through that connection. You don't have to require remote WMI, remote registry, that kind of thing on devices that you use this feature on. Some things, there are some things to set up in order to make this thing happen. And we'll have more details on our doc site and our blog that'll take you through step by step on how to do this. But one thing you'll have to do is import a script that's going to be included in the extras folder inside of your right-click tools install. So you'll have to import and approve that script. Then you'll have to come under permissions here and create a config manager scope. And the scope has to be one of the scopes that'll return devices on your config man site. So it can either be, everything in my config man site. So if I want basically the all systems collection, or I can scope it to a specific collection ID. If I say have a set of users or a set of devices that I really want to run this on, or use the config manager fast channel to run actions against, I can target that collection, right? This could be things like, well, here's a collection of work group devices where the right click tools just wouldn't work before, or maybe they're all the devices in an untrusted domain, or they're users that are typically not connected to a VPN, right? These are all good candidates to target for this fast channel scope. The other bit that you'll have to set up is a config manager fast channel route. And this is a new type of route that basically says, for the devices in that fast channel scope that I created before, send these actions to this proxy, right? And this proxy is going to what reaches out to the config-man SMS provider and says, hey, go ahead and run the script against these devices, right? So there are a couple of things you have to set up. One thing I will note about this fast channel scope is we do try to eliminate devices that aren't going to be compatible with this feature, right? So we'll check that the devices have the appropriate config-man client version before sending them to this route, and it works the same as any other route where devices that aren't compatible will fall back down to another route in the list, right? So we'll start here with the recast agent proxy. If the device has a recast agent, we'll use this route. If it does not, it'll go back to this route, say, well, are you compatible with fast channel? We'll send it along that route. If not, we're going to send it back to the config-man console to run as the user that requested that action. So we do try to have some intelligence about when we send the action to the fast channel route. One other bit that we do check for is we require a component be installed on your config-man clients, and it's basically a WMI provider that gets installed on the client so that the PowerShell script we use can just call into that WMI provider and say, hey, go ahead and run this action, right? And the reason we need that WMI provider is that the config-man fast channel limits the message size for these PowerShell scripts, right? So there are some actions in recast that actually return more data than the fast channel allows, right? So one example is in the system information tool. So if I come over to applications here, there's a lot of applications in this list, right? And if we tried to return it all at once, it would actually exceed the maximum message limits of that fast channel. So what we end up doing is when I hit refresh here, after some time, we'll notice that an initial bulk of results gets sent back to us. And then over time, we'll get more results in bulk. And so we're actually making multiple run scripts calls to that device to collect all of the information we need. So it's kind of interesting. So notice we have an initial set of results, but it's still actually running. And if I come back to the fast channel script status node, we notice we have a bunch of actions actually running to pull data from that device. So we do try to batch the requests so that we collect all the data we need in a shorter time span, because this fast channel path can be a little bit slower than the native right-click tools path, but we do try to shorten the time as much as possible there. So again, this is not in the 4.2 release. This will be released in our April version. Brian and I are just wrapping up a couple of last-minute things. And we'll have some blog posts, we'll have some documentation on it when we release it. So definitely keep an eye out for that. It is coming very, very soon. And now Chelsea is going to take us through some of the ways you can get the right-click tools from our website.
Yeah, thanks, Chris and Mark. My name is Chelsea, and I'm going to go through a brief tour of how you can get the latest version if you don't already have it installed. For enterprise customers, simply log into your portal account at portal.recastsoftware.com. You'll notice a little bit of a different look to the portal. Hopefully it's easier to navigate, but on that home screen, you'll see the latest version to download. And community users can download the latest version from any page on our website. Click the blue download tools button in the upper right corner and just fill out the form, and you'll get a download link in your inbox. And all community users receive 30 days free of enterprise, regardless if you've already had a trial. So you can try out all the features you saw today, as well as many others that are included within the enterprise edition. And I want to point out another feature we have under, it's a feature request page that we've been talking about in the questions and chat. It's under our feature navigation. And if you have ideas to make right-click tools better, please submit them on this page. You can add new ideas. You can upvote ideas that have already been added. You can sort by what's trending, what's popular. You can even search ideas. And we appreciate all the feedback on how the tools can be even more valuable. And we really look at this when deciding what features to ship in future releases. And for enterprise customers that need to get in touch with our support team, you can do so on our support page on our site, either by submitting a ticket or scheduling a call with our customer success team. And another mention for community users, we have a forum as a resource to get in touch with us if you have any issues or questions that come up. And finally, if you like what you saw today and are interested in seeing a price quote for your environment, please request a quote from our site. And if you're interested in seeing the full enterprise suite, you can schedule a one-on-one walkthrough with our team as well. And with that, we will move on to the Q&A portion of our webinar. Brian and Mark have been answering your questions throughout the webinar. Please submit additional questions in that Q&A section of the webinar. And we'd like to take a moment to say thank you for taking the time to listen in on our webinar today. And we hope the new features will be of help to you.
Yeah, so we have one question about the link for the enterprise download. Chelsea, can you just show where we can navigate to that on the website real quick? There should be a login at the very top of all of our web pages that you can use to log in and download the enterprise version. That'll just take you to portal.recastsoftware.com if you want to go there directly.
Yep.
It looks like we have another question about you've requested several times, but today you haven't gotten a reply for your request. I think we need more information about that. You know, it's based on when the question came in. I assume you're referring to the download. You know, we sometimes have issues with downloads getting in the junk mail folder, but you know, if you use the contact us link, we're usually more than happy to get you a link that'll work for you. So we have a question about how do we troubleshoot if recast software alone isn't working properly. For that, you know, if you're an enterprise user, I would definitely recommend submitting a support case. Our support team would be more than happy to reach out to you. Community users, you can submit new forum posts on our discourse forum, and if you think you found a bug, we actually have a special, you know, submit bug link inside of the support page. So if you're convinced it's a bug, please submit that, and we'll collect some logs from you. Actually, I think you can attach logs to that too. Yeah, so there's a file upload option there too. And you know, typically if it's a bug, we'll ask you for some logs. So that's where you can go to get help with that. Is there any additional setup required for the MBAM password retrieval tool? Yeah, we do. We require you to set up the admin service URL, the MBAM admin service URL inside of either your configure recast RCT or your recast management server. And you know, the reason we use that URL is because, you know, when we hit that API, it's actually going to trigger. It's actually going to notify MBAM that you know, we've looked at this password, or we've exposed this BitLocker key, and it'll tell the client that, hey, this key has been exposed. You need to recycle it and go ahead and do that. So we do require you configure that URL. It can be a little bit tricky to find. I think we have some documentation on it, but if you need help, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to support. So we have a comment about, you know, they want us to add the operating systems tab along with updates. We want to be able to kick off a Windows OS upgrade the same way we would kick off a Windows update. have a feature update in computer labs, and it would be awesome to initiate remotely. Brian, do you want to take
Well,
this
so
one?
I just want to, I think that's tags on, I'm guessing here, and I have to go back and look, but I think that's tagging on to, there was someone who asked about adding some operating system info into the remote software center. Right, so I think what Brian's asking here is, can we add the operating system tabs, operating system tab from system info into the remote software center, because it's the kind of info you might want to know when you're doing a feature update.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, ideas like that are great. We love that type of feedback. But definitely encourage you to use the feature requests page for that type of feedback, and it'll help make sure that we're not getting it wrong as we're as we're reading it live on the air here. So yeah, if you could write that up there, and it's a way for us to make sure we don't miss anything when looking at that. But that's really good feedback. Thank you for submitting that. Do we have any features in Recast to look at operating system deployment tasks? So in Remote Software Center, we can view a list of all task sequences deployed to a device. That'll show you what's available and let you kick those off remotely. We do have that in that system, or excuse me, the client info tool. We have the execution history to show you what has been executed on a device. And then if you're more looking for some live data, we do have a shortcut to kick off the status message viewer for operating systems. If you select a task sequence and go to deployments, you can right click and view all status messages, and that'll launch the status message view for that OS or for that task sequence deployment. But that's really all we have for operating system deployment tasks. If you have something you're looking for specifically, you can either submit a feature request or feature request is probably the best way if you're looking for something beyond that. Great question. Do you have a FAQ on common connection problems, RPC not available, computer not on, etc.? We do.
Just trying to find. Yeah, I was trying to find the doc link right now.
Yeah, so Marty just finished setting that up. Brian, if you go to docs and hit troubleshooting error messages, we can.
Yeah, I'll try to get the URL for that and type that in the reply if I can.
Yeah, great question. We're always trying to make that type of documentation better. So, if you see an error that's not on the list, please let us know. We have a question about access denied in Remote Software Center in 4.1. Is this fixed in 4.2? Access denied is actually Windows, a Windows level permission issue, and what it means is that the account that you're running the Remote Software Center as does not have permissions to do whatever it is we're trying to do on that remote device. So typically with the right-click tools, we've always said, well, you need remote or local admin on the remote devices that you're trying to connect to, and specifically the user that's running the configman console needs remote local admin. So if you right-click on your configman console and run it as a user, another user, you might need that. The enterprise version has a couple of ways to get around that local admin requirement. We talked about the configman fast channel support today. That's one way to get around it. Another way is to use service accounts. So we have the service account proxy for that. So you run actions as a user that's not running the configman console. And we have the Recast agent, which connects to the Recast management server and basically runs things as in a similar way to that fast channel. So a follow-up from David saying that you had a support case about this access denied issue, and they said it was a problem with the version that you're on. I'd have to follow up and see exactly.
Didn't we have a bug in somewhere? Remember where? Well, I was trying to remember, we had a bug early on in the Remote Software Center. And I'm trying to remember
Yeah.
what it was.
There have been a lot of issues fixed in 4.2 for Remote Software Center, but I honestly don't remember the exact scope. I think we had a bug where with applications that didn't have an icon were causing some issues in it. I don't remember an access denied specific issue though. But we'll follow up with our support team and try to go after any logs that you might have sent to us and try to see if we can find that. Great question. We'll follow up on it. The next question we have someone asking, can we look at SCCM logs through Recast? We don't have a way to like take a step back there. So we do have a couple of tools under client tools to open the configman client log folder and the client install log folders. Those are basically just shortcuts to opening Windows Explorer to that $C share. So if for whatever reason $C doesn't work for you, those tools won't be particularly helpful. And those are available in the community version. In the enterprise version, we do have a way to look at status messages, which often has a lot of the same data that you might see in those log files. So, it might be worth like right-clicking on a device and viewing status messages to see if the information you're looking for is in that status message, or if you're, oftentimes you're looking at logs to troubleshoot deployments, right-clicking on a deployment and viewing status messages for that deployment. So we have a question about some of the remote ports that we require. If we have a single document that talks about the specific ports we need that you can send to your networking team. Ports are a little bit tricky, right? Because we use remote WMI, and remote WMI has kind of a dynamic port structure where it makes an initial connection on a port and then replies back with some random high range port that you use to connect to. So sending like specific ports to your network team typically doesn't work, and that's why we've on our remote WMI documentation we've kind of highlighted the Windows firewall group policy for enabling it, because Microsoft has figured out how to allow those things through the Windows firewall. I don't think it's very easy to open that up through a third-party firewall, but I'm not as familiar with those. But we do have other options in the enterprise version. So if you're, again, if you can't open these firewall ports, or your network security team has issues opening these ports, what you can do is recommend maybe using that fast channel support, or maybe recommend using that recast agent option, both of which would require no ports to be opened on the remote devices. So a couple of other options there. If you want some further help on ports, you can reach out to support, and we can try to get a better idea of what exactly your network security team is looking for.
So I'll add something here, right? Like, so high level, if on our troubleshooting page, we have listed like the different requirements, but I don't know that we have a single document, and I think there could be benefit there to be like, hey, if you want, here's for the totality of our tools, here are the things that need to be enabled, right? Like,
yeah, that's true. The trick there is that it is a little bit context specific.
Okay.
Depending on like how you're running right-click tools, but for the majority of users, yeah, having a single document for remote WMI, registry, etc., would probably be very helpful.
And we can even preface with like, if you're running it in this mode or whatever.
Yeah, great question.
What I will do though is I'll point you to the troubleshooting page on our docs, because if you go through there, it lists all those things. I mean, it lists remote registry, remote WMI, and some of those things, and so the info's there. It's just not all on one page.
we had a question about the will this video be made available? And I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but we are going to post this video to our YouTube channel, or we're going to post a 4.2 release webinar video to the YouTube channel. So if you want to send it to your teammates, feel free to send them that link. Chills, I think we're going to send out the email tomorrow with the recording link to all attendees. These are great questions. Keep them coming. All right, we're going to do a last call for questions. If you have any questions, please submit them to the Q&A, and we'll try to get those answered. All right, it looks like the Q&A is coming down. Thank you everyone for attending the 4.2 release webinar. As we mentioned, the email link will go out tomorrow with a link to the YouTube video. But yeah, thanks again for attending, and let us know any feedback you have on the right-click tools.
Thanks, everyone.